My cousin married my ex-boyfriend, and at her wedding she told me, "I just wanted to prove I could take him from you." She said it right to my face while I stood next to the dessert table at her reception. "I just wanted to prove I could take him from you." Bree smiled like she'd just won something significant. Like marrying Nolan was a trophy she could dangle over my head for the rest of our lives. I didn't say anything, because honestly, what is there to say to that? I just nodded and walked off with my plate of cake, because I'd already accepted that my cousin was the kind of person who measured her own worth by what she could pull away from other people. Bree and I grew up 3 houses apart. Our moms were sisters, inseparable, which meant we were two. Dance lessons, swim team, school projects, birthday parties, all of it together. And somewhere along the way, Bree decided everything in her life had to be measured against mine. New shoes for me meant better ones for her. Honor roll for me meant she'd tell everyone her grades were higher, even when they weren't. When I got my first boyfriend in high school, Bree told him I was talking to other guys behind his back. He believed her, broke up with me, and then Bree dated him for a month just to prove she could. This was just her thing. She didn't want things because she actually wanted them, she wanted them because I already had them. So when I broke up with Nolan after 2 years, sick of him not holding down a job, expecting me to cover everything while he camped out on my couch playing video games, I wasn't surprised when Bree spotted her opening. She started texting him the same week I moved out of his apartment, the exact same week. She told the entire family Nolan was broken and just needed someone who could love him properly. She said I'd given up on him. She said a real woman sticks by her man through the hard times. She said all of this at family dinners while I sat right there eating my food saying nothing because what would have been the point? My mom told me to just ignore her. My aunt told me I should be happy for them. Bree posted about Nolan constantly long captions about how love finds you when you least expect it, how some people never recognize a good thing until somebody else snatches it up. Every post aimed straight at me without ever saying my name. 8 months later, Nolan proposed with a ring purchased on a payment plan, with Bree quietly covering the monthly installments. Didn't matter to her, she showed that ring to anyone who'd glance at her hand. She called me the night of the proposal and said, "Bet you're regretting letting him go now." I said congratulations and hung up. The wedding turned out exactly the way you'd expect from someone who treated marriage like a competitive sport. Bree made it the most extravagant event she could pull off, even though neither of them could remotely afford it. The whole thing went on 3 credit cards, designer dress, a vineyard venue an hour outside the city, over 200 guests, every relative we had, and she seated me at a table near the kitchen in the back, close enough to witness everything, far enough to never steal attention from her. All night during the reception, she made the rounds table by table, and at every single one she found a way to bring me up. She told my aunt's friends Nolan and I used to date, but sometimes people just end up where they're meant to be. She told our grandmother she hoped I'd find someone too, someday. She told a table full of Nolan's coworkers how grateful she was he'd found someone who actually appreciated him, since not everyone did. Every remark wrapped in something that sounded sweet on the surface, but anyone who actually knew us could hear what she was really saying underneath. After making her rounds, that's when she cornered me at the dessert table and dropped the act entirely. "I just wanted to prove I could take him from you." Like I said, I didn't respond. I just grabbed my cake and went back to my seat, because I knew something Bree didn't. I knew Nolan. I knew the version she paraded around at every family event was strictly temporary. I knew the charm faded right around month 4. I knew he'd quit whatever job he had by month 6 and start rambling about some new business idea that would never actually go anywhere. I knew the gaming would slide from a couple hours a day into the entire day. I knew he'd eventually start asking her for money, the exact same way he'd asked me. And I knew he'd somehow make her feel guilty for being frustrated about it, because that's just how Nolan operated. Not cruel about it exactly, he just had a knack for making you feel like the problem for daring to expect him to try. I didn't say any of that because Bree wouldn't have believed a word. She'd have called it jealousy. She'd have accused me of trying to wreck her happiness because I couldn't stand that she'd won. So I went home and got on with my life, finished my degree, got promoted at work. 14 months after the wedding, Bree called me sobbing at 2 a.m. I could barely make out her words through the crying, something about Nolan getting fired again, something about rent being 3 months overdue, credit card companies calling nonstop. I sat there on my couch in my quiet apartment, phone pressed to my ear, listening. The strange part was feeling 2 things at once. That "I told you so" satisfaction I knew would make me a terrible person to say out loud, and also a genuine ache, watching her learn firsthand everything I'd already known about Nolan. She kept crying, and I just let her, because what else could I really do? I didn't say I warned her. I didn't bring up the dessert table at her own wedding, or any of those comments at family dinners while I sat there eating in silence. I just asked if she was safe, asked if she had somewhere to go that night if she needed it. She paused, crying for a second, said she was fine, just needed someone to talk to. Then she told me Nolan was passed out asleep on the couch right then, headphones still on mid-game. She said she'd tried talking to him about their problems and he wouldn't even glance up, just stared at the screen like she wasn't even in the room. I heard her voice break on that last part, and I knew exactly what she meant, because I'd lived that same moment maybe 100 times when I was with him. The next morning I woke up to a text from Bree, apologizing for calling so late, saying it was just a rough night, everything was actually fine now. I read that message 3 times sitting in bed and could practically feel her pride rebuilding every wall she'd let slip for those 5 minutes at 2 a.m. So perfectly Bree, admitting a moment of weakness while making absolutely sure I understood it didn't change anything. Making sure I knew she still had it all under control, even though we both knew she didn't. I bumped into my aunt at the grocery store about a week after that. She looked exhausted in a way I'd never seen on her before, dark circles, hair scraped back into a messy ponytail. She mentioned Bree and Nolan were going through a rough patch, said they'd work it out because that's what marriage is. But the way she said it sounded more like she was trying to convince herself than me. Alyssa came to visit a few days later. We grabbed coffee and she asked about my cousin's wedding. So I told her the whole story from start to finish. How Bree had spent our entire lives competing with me. How she'd started texting Nolan the same week I moved out. How she married him purely to prove she could take him from me. How she said exactly that, to my face, at the reception. Alyssa just stared at me over her coffee cup, mouth literally open. When I finished, she said it was the most absurd thing she'd ever heard that my cousin married my ex to win some imaginary contest. Hearing Alyssa say it out loud actually made something click for me. I'd lived with Bree's competitive nonsense my whole life, so it felt almost normal by default. But but Alyssa hadn't grown up inside it. She heard the story fresh and saw exactly how warped the whole thing really was. She pointed out that through all this, I'd finished my degree, gotten promoted at work, gotten my own apartment, built my own life. Meanwhile, Bree was drowning in wedding debt, married to a guy I'd already proven was useless. Then she looked right at me and said maybe I'd actually won, simply by walking away. 2 months after that 2 a.m. phone call, I saw Bree at our grandmother's birthday dinner. She walked in doing this overly cheerful bit, talking loudly about how great everything was. Nolan wasn't with her. She said he wasn't feeling well, but I noticed her smile never quite reached her eyes whenever anyone asked about him. She kept spinning her wedding ring around her finger the whole night, over and over. My mom pulled me aside afterward, said Bree had asked to borrow money for some bills, then asked what I thought she should do. I told Mom that was between her and Bree, but added that lending money to somebody who won't admit there's a problem rarely ends well. Mom nodded like she already knew that, but wanted me to say it out loud so she wouldn't feel guilty saying no herself. Bree's social media shifted after that. The picture-perfect couple photos disappeared, replaced by passive-aggressive quotes about real love, sticking together through hard times, how some people give up too easily. Every post aimed squarely at me, though she never once typed my name. She was telling herself staying with Nolan made her better than me, that I'd quit, while she kept fighting, and fighting meant winning. I was at my desk at work when my coworker Sarah wandered over. She started telling me about her boyfriend's friend from some gaming forum said the guy got fired from his last job for simply not showing up 3 days straight, then acted shocked when they let him go. Sarah had no clue the guy she was describing was Nolan. No idea he was married to my cousin. I just nodded and said that tracked. Then went back to my work, thinking about how small the world gets sometimes. A few weeks passed and my aunt called me directly while I was cooking dinner. She never called me one-on-one, so I knew something was up. She did this whole routine, asking about my job, my apartment, like we were close, and I just waited it out. Eventually she asked if I'd talked to Bree lately. I said no. She said Bree was going through something hard, and maybe it'd help if she had someone who understood. I told her if Bree wanted to talk, she could reach out herself. My aunt said she was just worried about her daughter, thought maybe I could be the bigger person here. I said I'd happily listen if Bree wanted to talk, but I wasn't reaching out first, since that never went well with Bree. My aunt said okay, thanked me, and we hung up. I went back to making dinner, thinking about how my aunt still couldn't quite admit what was actually unfolding. Thanksgiving rolled around and the whole family gathered at my grandmother's. My mom pulled me into the kitchen, said Bree was coming but Nolan wasn't. She knew for a fact he'd quit his job 2 weeks earlier. Mom said not to bring it up, just let Bree spin whatever story she needed. Bree showed up an hour later with this bright, painted-on smile, claiming Nolan was working and couldn't get the day off. Nobody pushed back, but I caught my mom and aunt trading a look across the room. We sat down to eat and Bree just picked at her plate the whole meal, pushed the turkey around, took tiny bites of mashed potatoes, mostly just rearranged everything to look like eating. Someone asked about their apartment and Bree said it was great. They were really happy there. Every answer about her life came out short, rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the car. Halfway through dinner, she said she wasn't feeling well and needed to head home. Hugged my grandmother, left, and the whole family just sat there pretending we hadn't noticed how miserable she looked. My aunt started clearing plates while people were still eating, and nobody said a word about Bree's early exit. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I got a message from the photographer who'd shot Bree's wedding. She was trying to reach Bree about the remaining balance owed on the photos, said Bree had ignored emails and calls for 3 straight months. The balance was over $2,000. I wrote back that I didn't really talk to Bree much these days. The photographer thanked me, said she'd already tried Bree's mom too. 3 weeks later, someone knocked on my door around 9 on a Tuesday night. I checked the peephole and saw Bree standing in the hallway, not crying but shoulders sagging, dark circles under her eyes. I let her in. She sat on my couch staring at her hands for a minute before saying anything, then told me I'd been right about Nolan. Said everything I'd gone through with him was happening to her too, except worse, because now they were married, and she'd inherited his debt along with him. The wedding credit cards were maxed. Nolan's student loans had gone into default. He'd never made a single payment. She'd assumed he was handling it. He wasn't handling anything. Every time she brought up money, he'd go quiet, claim he was trying, and somehow make her feel guilty for even raising it. I went to the kitchen and made us both tea while she kept talking. Said Nolan hadn't held a real job in 5 months. He'd apply places, but something was always wrong with each one. Bad hours, low pay, too far a commute. She said he spent 16 hours a day gaming, and when she asked him to chip in for rent, he'd say he was stressed and needed time to decompress. She was working double shifts to cover everything, and he still asked her for money for game subscriptions. Said last week she'd told him they needed to cancel them, couldn't afford it anymore, and he didn't speak to her for 2 full days. She said the worst part was knowing I could say I told you so and choosing not to, which somehow made her feel even more pathetic. I handed her the tea, told her I wasn't going to say that, since it wouldn't help anyone. Bree asked what she should do. I told her honestly that was entirely her decision, but staying with someone who refused to try was just choosing misery. I said the Nolan she married was the exact same Nolan I'd dated, and he wasn't going to change. She asked how I knew that. I said because I'd given him 2 full years to change, and he never did. He'd promised to do better, try for maybe a week, then slide right back into the same patterns. The issue was never that he couldn't improve. It was that he didn't want it badly enough to actually put in the work. Bree started crying, said she felt so stupid for not listening to me. I told her she wasn't stupid, she just had to learn it for herself. We sat there for another hour, her crying and talking, me just listening. When she finally left, she hugged me and said thank you. 3 weeks passed without a word from Bree. Then my mom called on a Sunday afternoon to say Bree had moved back in with my aunt and was filing for divorce. Mom said my aunt had finally admitted she'd been wrong about Nolan being some good guy who just needed the right woman. Said my aunt felt awful for pushing Bree toward him, for not listening when I'd tried warning everyone. Mom said the family owed me an apology for acting like I'd given up something worth keeping. I told her I didn't need one. Just said I hoped Bree would be okay, and Mom said she figured Bree would be better off without him dragging her down. Christmas arrived, the whole family gathered at my aunt's. Bree looked different, quieter. None of the loud, performative cheerfulness, no trying to one-up anyone. When she spotted me, she came over and thanked me for listening that night at my apartment. Said Said she was sorry for everything, especially the wedding comment. Said she'd spent so long trying to prove she was better than me that she'd forgotten to just be happy for the both of us. I could tell she actually meant it this time. Something in her eyes had shifted, less guarded than before. She said she wasn't doing great yet, but she was working on it. We hugged, and the rest of the night felt lighter somehow, like something that had been pressing down on all of us for years had finally lifted. January arrived, and Bree texted asking if I wanted to grab coffee. She told me she'd started therapy, was working through why she'd spent her whole life competing with me. Her therapist asked what she'd been trying to prove, and she realized she didn't even know anymore. She'd picked up a second job, was setting up payment plans with every vendor she still owed. It would be a long road back financially, but she felt better just knowing she was finally moving forward instead of staying stuck. I told her I was proud of her, and this time she smiled for real. February came and my aunt invited me over for dinner. She pulled me aside, said she should have listened when I tried warning them about Nolan instead of dismissing it as jealousy. Said she'd pushed Bree toward him because she'd assumed I was just bitter, and she'd been wrong. She apologized for not believing me, for making me feel like the problem when I'd only ever been trying to help. I told her it was fine, that I understood she'd just been trying to protect Bree. She hugged me, thanked me for being there for Bree when she needed someone. We went back to the table, everyone ate and talked, and the whole dynamic felt different, like they finally saw I wasn't the problem in all this. My mom caught my eye across the table and smiled, and I smiled back. March arrived and Bree and I grabbed lunch at a sandwich place downtown. She looked lighter somehow, like she wasn't hauling around the weight of trying to outdo everyone anymore. She told me about her wedding debt payments, said she hadn't missed a single one, congratulated me on my promotion without any of that old edge in her voice. Asked about the guy I was seeing, and I told her about Jericho works in finance, has his own place, actually plans dates instead of expecting me to do everything. She smiled, said that sounded really nice, and I could tell she meant it. We finished eating, agreed to do this again next month, and I said sounds good. April brought my birthday, and Bree mailed a card with a gift card to my favorite coffee shop. The card just said happy birthday, hope this is your best year yet. No competition, no comparison. Just an ordinary birthday wish from a cousin learning to be okay with both of us doing well. Summer arrived, and at a family cookout, Bree and I ended up on the back porch talking while everyone else went inside for dessert. She told me her therapist had helped her see she'd spent so much energy trying to take things from me that she'd never figured out what she actually wanted for herself. Said she was working on that now. I told her I was glad she was doing better, and she said thanks for not giving up on her even when she'd given me every reason to. The sun went down, we went back in for cake, and it felt normal in a way it never had before. September arrived and Jericho and I hit our 1-year mark. Bree texted congratulations without me even mentioning it, so my mom must have told her. 2 weeks later, I saw on social media that Bree got promoted at her retail job to assistant manager. I texted congratulations and got back a thank you with a smiley face. October brought another family dinner, and Bree showed up looking genuinely happy for the first time in years. Not performing, not pretending, not trying to prove a thing, just there. We sat next to each other talking about regular stuff shows we were watching, places we wanted to travel someday. My aunt watched us from across the room, and I caught her wiping her eyes, looking relieved we'd finally found our way to something that actually worked. November came and I got another promotion at work, this time to senior manager. Bree called to congratulate me, said she was proud of me, and I believed her, because there wasn't a trace of bitterness left in her voice. Said she'd been saving money, might manage her own apartment by spring if she kept up with the payment plans. I told her that was amazing, and meant it. By December, we sat at Christmas dinner without any of that old tension hanging over us. She told a funny story about a customer at work, and everyone laughed, me included, because it genuinely was funny. After dinner, cleaning up in the kitchen together, she thanked me for being patient with her while she figured her life out. I told her everyone deserves a chance to start over. We'll never be best friends, probably not the way we might have been if she hadn't spent our whole lives competing. No late night phone calls about everything and nothing. No planning trips together. No being each other's first call when something big happens. But we can sit in the same room without that toxic energy poisoning everything. We can text about normal things, meet for lunch, feel genuinely happy when good things happen to each other. And honestly, that's enough for me.